So July 19th is a date that some of us will remember for a long time, a tragic date for parents and teachers as well. That 13-year-old boy, murdered allegedly by a schoolmate at River Valley High School.
And in Parliament, our Education Minister Chan Chun Sing took us through the timeline of that particular incident. That was very intriguing for me about, what time the kid was found, who was asked to call the police and all that. And so far from that school, at least 540 students and staff have sought psychological support. They put up an emergency response post at the school.
That was the number that stood out for me. That's not a small number. I mean, I don't know the entire population of the school, but, that number stuck out for me. The Education Minister went on to say that MOE will strengthen support networks in all schools, and also give all teachers enhanced training on mental health literacy.
Certainly changes the definition of what a teacher is here in Singapore going down the road. So that's going to be a topic of discussion for another time. Hey, Dr. Janil Putucherry is leading this discussion, and he's going to be joining us later on the show too in this hour. But for now, let's speak with Dr. Shawn Yee, clinical psychologist and psychoanalytic psychotherapist. He's also director at the psychology practice. Dr. Yee, nice of you to join us this morning.
Hi, good morning, Yasmin and Arnold.
Hi, we saw you on TV yesterday, and you were discussing this too, so it's good of you to, speak on radio too. Arnold's very impressed by this number, 540 students and staff.
Impressed is probably not the right word.
Well, it's good, isn't it, Arnold?
It's stuck out. And
the more we talk about it, the better.
Yeah, so are you encouraged, first of all, by this number? And what can be done about, there are some, we imagine, or hopefully not, who are still maybe holding back and trying to decide whether or not to seek help? How can we reach out to this particular group?
I think, let's think about this. Firstly, I think it's very optimistic to hear that lots of students and staff members are actually taking up, the help that is provided and a lot of support from the government and schools at the moment. I do think as a psychologist, I'm always thinking quite with a healthy skepticism about the other children that might not be so comfortable, which we call hiding in plain sight. Okay, so for example, some children or staff might feel like they don't know how to access, even though they're told, and the other part might be they don't feel like they want to access that help.
Dr. Yee, let me ask you about the word skepticism that you use here. When you say healthy skepticism, you're saying don't take their assertion that they're fine at face value, but to keep watching and be vigilant. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it pays a lot of dividends for much later if we keep thinking that there will be other people that might require a certain way of approach and might be even more comfortable if we were sensitive enough to pick up some other aspects that are quite common for adolescents at their age too.
A key factor, Dr. Yee, in this, I imagine, is trust. I mean, adults, want to be able to trust someone before they approach someone to seek help. And I imagine for kids, it's even more critical, right? Is there anything that can be done, to build trust, for a counselor, so that kids, feel that they can approach freely without fear?
I think that's the key word, trust, as I would agree with you, Arnold. I think before we think about trust, you might have to think about what are the key issues underlying the, safety, and therefore being able to trust an adult or a peer. So I think what comes to mind for me, right, is how it can be quite a scary and anxiety-provoking experience in adolescence. Coupled with this need for this culture of solidarity right now that's been, pushed out quite a bit. So if I have a differing kind of experience or attitude towards the trauma, I would sort of be stigmatized for it. People would say that, hey, why are you so drama? Don't be like that, lah,
Okay.
Be positive, lah, and already mental health concerns are quite a stigma. I would imagine that there might be quite a few students already hiding in plain sight in the schools or community that might actually identify with the perpetrator. And what I mean by identifying the perpetrator here would actually be about having mental health concerns and people minimizing them and not being able to.
You were talking about the kids who are hiding, and it's very interesting because Minister Chan drew a link between the pandemic and challenges to kids. I imagine the pandemics allowed a lot of kids to hide behind their home-based learning screens. Can you talk to us about how the pandemic could have worsened their mental health in general?
Of course. Look, I think it's the best thing that we can do right now, especially with concerning about public health, and we want to minimize the spread. But at the same time, we need to remember, I suppose, and not forget that kids are on the spectrum of development right now, and it's a normal, healthy thing to actually be able to interact with other people and socialize from early on.
Which brings me to the next question about, the return of CCAs for students. They want to do MOE, that is, wants to do this as quickly as possible. Can you explain why this is so important? And I say this because I've spoken to a number
isn't it, Arnold?
I've spoken to a number of parents, and they fear that kids don't have fun anymore. All they do is study, stress, and there's nothing else. Is that a valid concern?
Of course. Anything to do with learning and not being able to have some fun in the process can actually cheapen the experience and cause a lot of students, like a lot of us who have grown up with very traditional ways of learning, and especially some harsh ways as well, can actually feel like, I don't really like studying. Learning process gets kind of like boring and non-involved.
Okay, let's talk about community and peer support. Huge point made by Minister Chan yesterday. He said social pressure and the importance of community and peer support in helping to counter that. The community must really spot the signs, but we don't want to be intrusive. So how do we balance all that?
So I think first and foremost, I think the idea is correct. There's a lot of psychological research to point towards community and peer support as being helpful and protective against mental illness. But whilst considering that, at the same time, a lot of this right now at this stage can become very overwhelming for people who tend to be quite sensitive to having too much on their plate. Okay, so if one has gone through this traumatic experience, past this immediate phase would also become sort of like the need for meaning making. So after having the shock and numbness, right now what we want to experience is trying to make meaning of what happened.
Right. To understand.
And this is important for dealing with traumatic experience.
Okay. So is it fair to say, Dr. E, that it isn't necessarily a short-term impact that some people will feel? I mean, that's the immediate impact. But down the road, it's possible that, it rears up again unexpectedly? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah?
Absolutely. I think we brought this up in the current affairs show the other night, whereby we said trauma triggers can come up at any point in time. So we want to try to look out for signs such as, whether people suddenly feel like they can't sleep, or they lose appetite, they feel like they're very disturbed all of a sudden. We can be triggered by many things. So if you read the news a lot, on social media a lot, it triggers you, and suddenly you're wondering why you are very emotional.
Right. And this can be like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road even.
So usually if it's within the first couple of, the immediate part, first couple of months to about 6 months, I think the signs should be quite clear. If let's say anyone close to you notices that you're out of character, if you're quite disturbed, and quickly try to get some help before it gets kind of like the post-traumatic and thereafter the chronic, the PTSD and chronic PTSD.
Okay.
Dr. E, it's interesting, this morning we're talking about the parenting style that some of us have become accustomed to, where you kind of compare kids with other kids. Some say it's a very Asian kind of phenomenon, and it works for some kids and it doesn't, huh?
Yeah, certainly. I think we always need to, tailor-make our parenting style, not just to include what's appropriate in the culture, but also what is good psychologically speaking. So we always want to focus on a child's sense of security first, as well as sharing feelings and talking about feelings. Some of this stuff whilst, it's popularized, because it's the Western sort of ideas.
Yeah.
Actually, as human beings, right, we are all pre-programmed to want connection with people.
Right.
And then how do you know if the kids need help? Can you tell us about the signs that we tend to miss?
So it depends on how young your kids are. So during this pandemic, as well as this school occurrences, right, we might face the same kind of issues, which are that my kids want to, if they're a lot younger, my kids are fussing a lot, they don't want to sleep, and they want to stay up longer to watch some cartoon. And a lot of this can be potential signs because they don't know and they don't have the language of being able to express people talking about people dying around us and all that. Then
so
when they have to hear the news.
There's a change in behavior is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
But I also think that too much of focus on behavior can lead us away from the underlying stuff.
Okay.
And what that is our relationship needs.
Right.
Yeah.
And before we let you go, Doctor, a very quick one. Do you spend a lot of time helping your patients, the people who come to see you, navigate social media and how they react to social media?
It's a good question, Arnold. I think the issues of social media always tend to pop up for some reason. Yeah. It's whether they feel like they have been, marginalized somehow by some indirect kind of comments, or they feel quite pressurized to be a particular way. Just like how we consume magazines talking about how we should look, the same way if we were to just look at images or news and things like that.
Okay, understood. Dr. Yee, it's been a pleasure and an education talking to you. Appreciate you spending the morning talking to us.
My pleasure.
Dr. Shawn Yee is a clinical psychologist and psychoanalytic psychotherapist and also director at the Psychology practice.